Ambassador Daniel Crawford straightened his formal uniform as the transport shuttle descended toward Axiom Prime. He had practiced his speech 1,000 times. During the 3-month journey from Earth, his hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from excitement. This was the moment humanity had worked toward for 30 years. Today, Earth would join the galactic community as an equal partner. Today, everything would change. The shuttle broke through the purple clouds, and Daniel saw the Galactic Council headquarters for the first time. The structure defied logic and physics, a massive crystalline sphere floating above the planet's surface without any visible support. Towers of light connected it to the ground below, and ships from 100 different worlds moved around it like insects around a hive. Daniel felt small looking at it, but he reminded himself that he represented 7 billion humans who deserved a voice among the stars. His assistant, a young diplomatic aide named Peter Walsh, sat across from him reviewing the final protocols. Peter had spent years learning the customs of the Council's 70 member species. He knew which species considered eye contact aggressive, which ones expected physical contact as greeting, and which ones communicated through color changes in their skin. Daniel trusted him completely. The shuttle docked at one of the lower receiving platforms. Daniel and Peter were met by a Thesian protocol officer, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish made of silver light. It spoke through a translation device that rendered its bioluminescent pulses into flat, emotionless English. The council would see them in 1 hour. They were to wait in the preparation chamber and speak to no one. Daniel spent that hour in silence. Peter tried to make small talk, but Daniel needed to focus. He reviewed his speech one final time, memorizing every word and every pause. He thought about his wife Katie back on Earth, probably watching the news feeds with their daughter Emma. He had promised them he would make them proud. He had promised all of humanity. The summons came exactly on time. 2 guards, members of the Vacrine species, escorted Daniel and Peter through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked. The Vacrine were tall reptilian beings with scales that shimmered between green and gold. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Their faces showed nothing but cold contempt. The council chamber was beyond anything Daniel had imagined. It was a sphere within the greater sphere, with seating arranged in circular tiers that rose toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond. 70 species sat in their designated sections, some in atmosphere-controlled bubbles, others on platforms adjusted for their gravity needs, and a few existing as pure energy contained in magnetic fields. At the center of it all, on the highest platform, sat Chairman Vexthar of the Polarian species. He looked almost human except for the third eye in the center of his forehead and skin that shifted between blue and purple depending on his mood. He gestured for Daniel to approach the speaking platform at the chamber's center. Daniel walked forward with measured steps. Peter remained at the entrance as protocol demanded. Daniel reached the platform and activated his neural implant, which would broadcast his words with translation to every being present. He began his speech. He spoke of Earth's journey from a divided world to a united species. He described humanity's achievements in science, art, and culture. He explained how humans had learned to overcome their differences and work together for common goals. He talked about Earth's desire to learn from older civilizations and contribute to the greater galactic community. He spoke of peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. The council listened in silence. Daniel thought he saw approval in some faces and curiosity in others. He was wrong. As he reached the conclusion of his speech, Chairman Vexthar raised one hand. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Chairman Vexthar's skin shifted to a dark purple that Peter had warned meant anger or disgust. The chairman spoke in a voice that echoed through the chamber without need for translation devices. His words were meant to carry power and judgment. Humanity had been observed for 3 decades. They had been found wanting. Their expansion into their own solar system showed territorial aggression. Their continued development of weapons despite having no enemies proved their violent nature. Their inability to fully unite under a single government demonstrated chaos and disorder. Most damning of all, they had dared to request membership as equals when they should have begged for permission as inferiors. Daniel tried to respond, but his voice was cut off. The Vacrine representative, a massive being named Supreme Marshal Caxthor, rose from his seat. He spoke of the sacred doctrine of knowing one's place. Young species must learn humility before they earn respect. Humanity had shown no humility. They had shown only arrogance and presumption. Daniel felt ice in his veins. This was not going as planned. This was not a negotiation or a discussion. This was a judgment that had been decided long before he arrived. He tried again to speak, to defend his species, to explain that Earth came in peace. Chairman Vexthar activated something with a gesture. A containment field materialized around Daniel, a sphere of blue energy that lifted him off the platform. Daniel's neural implant suddenly activated on its own, broadcasting everything he saw and felt directly back to Earth. He realized with horror that they wanted Earth to watch what came next. The chairman spoke the sentence with cold finality. For the crime of presumption, and for violating the doctrine of knowing one's place, the human ambassador would be executed as an example. Humanity would be placed under quarantine for 500 years. They would not leave their solar system. They would not contact other species. They would learn to be grateful for the mercy of being allowed to exist at all. Daniel screamed as the containment field filled with plasma fire. The pain was beyond anything he had imagined possible. His skin burned, his lungs filled with superheated air, and his neural implant broadcast every moment of his agony across the light years to Earth. He thought of Katie and Emma. He thought of the 7 billion humans who had trusted him to represent them. He tried to speak one final message, but his vocal cords burned away. The execution took 47 seconds. Daniel Crawford died screaming while 70 species watched without emotion or mercy. His body was reduced to ash that the containment field dispersed into recycling systems. The council moved on to the next item on their agenda without further comment. Peter Walsh stood at the entrance of the chamber, tears streaming down his face, forbidden by protocol from moving or speaking. The Vacrian guards watched him with amusement, waiting to see if he would break protocol and give them an excuse to kill him too. On Earth, in the Situation Room beneath the White House, President Linda Morgan watched the execution live with her entire cabinet and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral Jack Porter, commander of Earth's small but growing space fleet, stood beside her with his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. Captain Nicole Hayes, commanding officer of Earth's first deep space warship, received the transmission aboard her vessel and felt something cold and hard settle into her heart. President Morgan spoke into the silence that followed Daniel's death. Her voice was calm, but everyone in the room could hear the fury beneath it. She gave orders to recall all human ships to defensive positions. She activated the emergency mobilization protocols that would transform Earth's economy into a war machine. She authorized Admiral Porter to assume full military command of all space-capable forces. Then she made one more call, to the laboratory complex in Geneva, where Dr. Helen Carter and her team had been working on experimental drive systems. President Morgan asked one question. Could the Shah Fujita drive be ready for combat operations within 30 days? Dr. Carter said yes. The Galactic Council had just started a war with humanity. They would learn too late that some species do not kneel, some species do not forgive, and some species, when pushed beyond all reasonable limits, become something far more dangerous than the Council had ever imagined possible. Earth was going to war, and the galaxy would never be the same. The world watched Daniel Crawford burn, and the world responded with unified rage that transcended every border and old grudge humanity had ever known. Within 6 hours of the execution, President Linda Morgan stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Every seat was filled. Every nation sent their highest representatives. The chamber was silent as Morgan walked to the podium. She did not waste time with diplomatic pleasantries or careful political language. She showed the footage again, all 47 seconds of it, forcing every delegate to watch a good man die screaming while alien species looked on without mercy or remorse. When the footage ended, Morgan spoke in a voice that carried steel beneath every word. The Galactic Council had declared war on humanity whether they knew it or not. Earth would respond with every weapon, every ship, and every soldier they possessed. This was not a request for approval. This was a declaration of total mobilization. The vote was unanimous. Every nation on Earth pledged their space forces, their resources, and their people to a unified command structure. The old military alliances dissolved in favor of something new, something humanity had never achieved before. Within 12 hours, the Earth Defense Force was born, combining American carriers with Chinese destroyers, Russian missile ships with European frigates, and vessels from 50 other nations into a single fleet with a single-purpose admiral. Jack Porter moved his command center from the Pentagon to the orbital headquarters, station that circled Earth at twice the altitude of the old International Space Station. The facility had been built over 10 years as a coordination hub for humanity's various space programs. Now it became a war room. Porter brought his best people with him. Colonel Ryan Mitchell, a tactical genius who had spent his career studying theoretical space combat scenarios that everyone thought would never happen. Commander Lisa Grant, an intelligence analyst who had dedicated 15 years to learning everything the Council allowed humanity to know about their civilization. Mitchell and Grant worked 72 hours straight after the execution, barely stopping to eat or sleep. They analyzed every scrap of data Earth had collected during 3 decades of observation. They studied Council ship movements, trade routes, and military deployments. What they discovered changed everything. The Galactic Council had not fought a real war in over 800 years. Their military existed primarily to intimidate primitive species and enforce quarantines. Their ships were beautiful, elegant, and designed more for ceremony than combat. Their tactics were ancient, unchanged for centuries because no one had ever challenged them successfully. Mitchell presented his findings to Admiral Porter with barely contained excitement. The Council was overconfident to the point of arrogance. They believed their technology made them invincible. They had not innovated or adapted because they had never needed to. This was humanity's advantage. Earth's military forces had spent the last century preparing for conflicts against enemies with equal or superior technology. Every human warship was designed with redundancy, armor, and practical firepower. Where Council vessels relied on energy shields and directed energy weapons, human ships carried kinetic weapons, missiles, and nuclear warheads that worked on simple physics rather than complex technology. While Mitchell analyzed tactics, Commander Grant focused on intelligence gathering. She identified a Council listening post in a system 3 light-years from Earth. The post monitored human communications and ship movements, reporting everything back to Council headquarters. Grant proposed a bold plan. If humanity could capture that post intact, they would gain access to 800 years of Council military records, ship specifications, and strategic deployments. Admiral Porter approved the mission immediately. He assigned it to Captain Nicole Hayes and her ship, the EDS Valiant. Hayes had commanded the Valiant for 2 years, leading deep space exploration missions to the outer solar system. Her crew trusted her completely, and she had a reputation for completing impossible assignments. When Porter briefed her on the mission, Hayes accepted without hesitation. Her pilot, Lieutenant Greg Palmer, was the best in the fleet. Her weapons officer, Lieutenant Karen Ross, could hit targets at ranges that seemed impossible. Her chief engineer, Lieutenant Paul Jensen, could keep the Valiant running even when half its systems failed. The Valiant left Earth orbit 36 hours after Daniel Crawford died. They traveled in complete radio silence, running dark with all non-essential systems shut down. The journey took 4 days at maximum sustainable speed. When they reached the listening post system, Hayes ordered the crew to battle stations. They approached from the star's shadow, using the radiation to mask their heat signature. The Council listening post was a small station with a crew of only 12 beings from 3 different species. They had no weapons beyond basic defensive systems. They had never imagined anyone would attack them. Lieutenant Palmer brought the Valiant alongside the station so smoothly, the Council crew did not even register the approach until human Marines were breaching their airlocks. The capture took 11 minutes. The Council crew surrendered without resistance, shocked that the primitive humans had traveled beyond their solar system and overwhelmed by the efficiency of the assault. Lieutenant Ross supervised the download of every data file in the station's computers. The intelligence hall was beyond anything Commander Grant had hoped for. Ship designs, fleet compositions, supply line routes, communications protocols, and most valuable of all, evidence of the Council's complete contempt for humanity's military capabilities. Hayes brought the Valiant back to Earth with the prisoners and the data. Admiral Porter personally congratulated her crew and immediately sent the data to every analysis team in the Defense Force. What they learned in the following days gave humanity hope. The Council had 2,000 warships scattered across their territory. but most were patrol vessels designed for police actions. Only 300 were true capital ships capable of fleet engagement. Better still, Council ships were slow by human standards, relying on jump gate networks that required hours to traverse between systems. Dr. Helen Carter's team in Geneva worked miracles during those same days. The Shah-Fujita drive had been theoretical research, a project exploring the possibility of faster-than-light travel without relying on the Council's jump gate network. Carter and her team had been making steady progress, expecting to have a working prototype within 5 years. President Morgan's question changed everything. Could they deliver combat-ready drives in 30 days? Carter said yes, but only because she was willing to skip every safety protocol and testing procedure that normally governed experimental technology. She pushed her team to exhaustion, running simulations and building prototypes at a pace that ignored human limitations. The Shah-Fujita drive worked by creating a bubble of compressed spacetime around a vessel, allowing it to effectively travel faster than light without actually breaking physics. The calculations were brutal, the power requirements enormous, and the risk of catastrophic failure substantial. On day 23, Carter successfully tested the first drive on an unmanned probe. The probe jumped from Earth to Mars in 4 minutes, a journey that normally took days or weeks depending on orbital positions. The probe returned intact with all systems functional. Carter immediately began mass production, retrofitting every combat-capable human ship with the new drive system. The work required stripping out non-essential systems and pushing shipyard crews to work in continuous shifts. But it got done. By day 40 after Daniel Crawford's execution, Earth had transformed completely. Every major city had recruitment centers overflowing with volunteers. Factories retooled to produce weapons, ammunition, and ship components. The asteroid mining operations in the belt shifted from commercial extraction to military production. Mars Colony sent every ship it had to join the Defense Force. Even the research stations around Jupiter pledged their support. Admiral Porter assembled the fleet beyond Jupiter's orbit, far enough from Earth that Council surveillance would not detect the gathering. 120 warships, everything humanity could put into space that carried weapons and a crew. Some were purpose-built military vessels from various national navies. Others were converted cargo haulers and mining ships retrofitted with weapons and armor. Every single one had been equipped with the Shah-Fujita drive and carried crews that had trained for combat they hoped would never come. Commander, Grant's intelligence team reported that the Council had finally responded to humanity's silence. A peacekeeping fleet of 20 ships was en route to Earth to enforce the quarantine. The Council expected easy compliance. They expected humans to beg for mercy and accept their punishment. They had no idea that humanity had spent 40 days preparing to fight. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valiant, now the flagship of the 3rd Strike Squadron. Around her, the human fleet waited in perfect silence, hidden among Jupiter's moons and the debris of the asteroid belt. Every crew member knew what was coming. Every captain had their orders. When the Council fleet arrived, they would learn that humanity did not beg. They did not surrender. And they absolutely did not forgive. Admiral Porter broadcast one final message to the fleet before the battle. He reminded them why they were here. He spoke Daniel Crawford's name. He told them that today, humanity would show the galaxy who they really were. Not victims, not primitives. Warriors who fought for every inch of ground and gave no quarter to those who started wars they could not finish. The Council peacekeeping fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. They expected to find a frightened species cowering near their homeworld. Instead, they found 100 human warships emerging from the shadows with weapons hot and fury in their hearts. The Battle of Jupiter's Gate was about to begin, and the Galactic Council was about to learn the cost of murdering human diplomats. Commander, Zorath of the Thesian hegemony led the Council's peacekeeping fleet with absolute confidence in his mission and complete certainty of its outcome. He commanded 20 warships drawn from 6 different Council species, each vessel a masterpiece of elegant design and technological superiority. His flagship, the Radiant Dawn, had served for 3 centuries without ever firing its weapons in actual combat. Zorath expected today would be no different. The humans would see his fleet, understand their situation, and accept the quarantine with appropriate humility. The fleet emerged from their jump at the designated coordinates near Earth's outer solar system. Zorath reviewed the tactical display with satisfaction. The primitive human homeworld lay defenseless ahead, exactly where his intelligence reports predicted. He prepared to broadcast the standard compliance message that had worked on dozens of species before. Young civilizations always learn to obey eventually. His sensors officer reported an anomaly. There were no human ships in orbit around Earth, no defensive platforms, no military presence whatsoever. Zorath frowned at this unexpected development. Perhaps the humans had fled to their colony on Mars. Perhaps they were hiding on their moon. It did not matter. His orders were clear. Enforce the quarantine and depart. Lieutenant Greg Palmer watched the Council fleet from his position aboard the Valiant, hidden behind one of Jupiter's ice moons nearly 500 million miles from Earth. His hands rested steady on the flight controls while Captain Nicole Hayes stood behind him studying the tactical plot. 20 Council ships had arrived exactly where Commander Grant predicted they would. The ambush was perfect. Hayes opened a channel to the rest of 3rd Strike Squadron. 15 human ships waited with her, all running silent and cold, invisible to Council sensors that expected threats to announce themselves with active drives and energy signatures. She gave the order with a calm voice that betrayed none of the rage burning in her chest. All ships were to fire on her mark. Target the engines first, no mercy, no hesitation. Lieutenant Karen Ross armed every weapon on the Valiant. Railguns that could accelerate tungsten slugs to a fraction of light speed. Missile tubes loaded with nuclear warheads. Laser arrays designed to burn through armor. Everything humanity had built in 40 days of furious preparation. She designated her target, the 2nd largest ship in the Council formation, and waited for the captain's command. Hayes watched the tactical clock count down. She thought about Daniel Crawford screaming as he died. She thought about every human who had watched that execution and felt helpless rage. She thought about her own daughter back on Earth who had asked why the aliens were so mean. Hayes gave the order to fire. 16 human ships opened fire simultaneously from positions the Council fleet never expected to be occupied. Railgun rounds crossed the distance in seconds, moving too fast for Council shields to properly deflect. The physics were simple and brutal. A 10-kilogram tungsten slug traveling at 30,000 miles per second carried more kinetic energy than most energy weapons could match. Council shields designed to stop lasers and plasma shattered like glass under the impact. Commander Zorath's tactical officer screamed a warning half a second before the first rounds hit. 3 Council ships lost their main engines in the opening salvo. Another 2 suffered critical hull breaches as slugs punched completely through their elegant structures. The Radiant Dawn shuddered as 2 rounds glanced off her shields, draining them to 40% capacity in an instant. Zorath tried to understand what was happening. His sensors finally detected the human ships but reported impossible readings. The primitive vessels were using faster-than-light drives that should not exist. They were firing kinetic weapons that his shields were not designed to stop. Worst of all, they were coordinating their attack with precision that suggested months of tactical planning rather than the desperate defense he had anticipated. He ordered his fleet to return, fire, and tried to broadcast a distress signal to Council headquarters. His communications officer reported that all channels were being jammed by human electronic warfare systems. They were alone, cut off, and under attack by an enemy that should not have possessed any of these capabilities. Admiral Jack Porter watched the battle unfold from his command center in orbit above Earth. The data feed from 3rd Strike Squadron showed exactly what he had hoped to see. Council ships were powerful but slow to react. Their crews had never experienced real combat. Their tactics came from manuals written centuries ago for battles against opponents who followed the same rules. Humanity followed no rules. Porter gave the order for the main fleet to advance. 70 warships emerged from behind Jupiter with drives burning at maximum power. They had been waiting in reserve, ready to exploit whatever opening Hayes created. Now they accelerated toward the Council fleet at speeds that Council sensors registered as impossible for vessels of their size. Lieutenant Paul Jensen kept the Valiant's engines running beyond their rated specifications while the ship twisted and turned through space in patterns no Council captain had ever seen. Hayes used the Shafajita drive in short bursts, jumping the Valiant from one attack position to another faster than Council targeting systems could track. Ross fired continuously, her railguns heating to dangerous levels as they hammered the same Council ship again and again until its shields collapsed and its hull split open. Commander. Zorath realized with growing horror that his fleet was being destroyed. 5 ships were already disabled or destroyed. Another 7 had suffered critical damage. His own flagship was down to 20% shield strength and had lost half its maneuvering thrusters. The humans were everywhere, attacking from impossible angles, using weapons and tactics that 3 centuries of Council military doctrine had never prepared him to counter. He tried to order a retreat but discovered that human ships had positioned themselves between his fleet and the jump point. The Radiant Dawn could not reach escape velocity before the human main fleet would be in weapons range. Zorath faced the unthinkable reality that his peacekeeping mission had become a massacre, and he was on the wrong side of it. Captain Hayes designated the Radiant Dawn as her primary target. The Council flagship was the largest vessel in the enemy formation, and clearly the command ship. Destroying it would break whatever coordination the Council fleet still maintained. She ordered Ross to prepare a full missile spread, nuclear warheads set for maximum yield. 12 missiles launched from the Valiant in rapid succession. They accelerated toward the Radiant Dawn, while Ross guided them through defensive fire with manual corrections that no automated system could match. 8 missiles reached their target. 8 nuclear explosions bloomed against the Council flagship's failing shields. The Radiant Dawn's shields collapsed completely. The ship's elegant hull, designed more for beauty than armor, buckled under the thermal and kinetic stress. Systems failed across every deck. Commander Zorath watched his bridge fill with smoke and sparks while alarms screamed warnings he could no longer address. He had no choice left. He broadcast an unconditional surrender on all frequencies and prayed the humans would show more mercy than the Council had shown Daniel Crawford. Admiral Porter received the surrender and accepted it. He ordered all human ships to cease fire on vessels broadcasting surrender codes, but to continue destroying any Council ships that still showed active weapons. The battle lasted another 40 minutes as the human fleet systematically disabled or destroyed every Council vessel that refused to surrender. By the end, 17 Council ships had been captured or disabled. Only 3 had been completely destroyed, and those only because their crews had fought to the last. Human casualties were minimal. 2 ships had suffered moderate damage. 17 crew members were wounded. No one died. Porter broadcast the battle footage across every communication channel the Council used, along with a message from President Linda Morgan. The message was simple and direct. You burned our diplomat alive. Now learn what humanity does to those who start wars they cannot finish. The Galactic Council received the transmission 6 hours later. Chairman Vexthar watched the footage in his private chambers with growing disbelief. The peacekeeping fleet had been destroyed by primitives using impossible technology. The humans had not run. They had not begged. They had fought with a ferocity and tactical sophistication that no one predicted. Even worse, they had broadcast the battle for everyone to see. Every species in Council space would watch this footage. Every species would see the Council's military humiliated. Supreme Marshal Caxthor of the Vakreen demanded immediate retaliation. He called for the mobilization of the Grand Fleet, 2,000 warships drawn from every Council military. The humans had won a single battle against a small peacekeeping force. They would not survive a real war against the full might of galactic civilization. Chairman Vexthar agreed. The Grand Fleet would assemble at Terminus Gate and crush humanity permanently. Commander Lisa Grant had predicted this response with 97% certainty. She had already prepared Admiral Porter's next move. Humanity would not wait for the Grand Fleet to assemble and attack Earth. Instead, they would strike first at targets across Council space. They would hit hard, hit fast, and hit everywhere simultaneously. The Council wanted war. Humanity would give them war beyond anything they imagined possible. Captain Hayes brought the Valiant home to Earth orbit for resupply and repairs. Her crew had performed perfectly. Palmer had flown like the ship was an extension of his own body. Ross had not missed a single shot. Jensen had kept the engines running through maneuvers that should have torn them apart. Hayes was proud of them all. She was also grimly aware that the real war was just beginning. The Battle of Jupiter's Gate had proven that humanity could fight the Council and win. Now they had to prove they could sustain that fight across dozens of star systems and hundreds of battles. Admiral Porter gave Hayes 3 days to rest and refit before her next mission. 3rd Strike Squadron would lead the attack on the Vakreen military shipyards at Dakara. If they succeeded, they would cripple nearly half of the Council's military production capacity. If they failed, Earth would face the Grand Fleet with no hope of victory. Hayes accepted the mission without hesitation. War had come to humanity, and humanity would fight it their way. Admiral Jack Porter studied the star charts in his command center above Earth with the focus of a chess master planning 20 moves ahead. The victory at Jupiter's Gate had proven humanity could fight the Council and win. Now they needed to prove they could sustain that fight across the vastness of space. Commander Lisa Grant's intelligence analysis showed the Council was mobilizing their Grand Fleet at Terminus Gate, gathering 2,000 warships from across their territory. That mobilization would take weeks to complete. Porter intended to use every single one of those weeks to cripple the Council's ability to wage war. Captain Nicole Hayes received her new orders while the Valiant was still being resupplied and repaired. 3rd Strike Squadron would lead the assault on Dakara, a Vakreen colony world that hosted the largest military shipyards in Council space. 40% of all Council warships were built in the orbital facilities above Dakara. Destroying those shipyards would be like cutting off the Council's right arm. Hayes assembled her squadron commanders and laid out the mission parameters. They would jump directly into Dakara's defensive perimeter, using the Shah Fujita drive, hit the shipyards with everything they had, and jump out before the local defense fleet could coordinate a response. Lieutenant Greg Palmer spent hours studying the approach vectors and calculating jump coordinates. Dakara's orbital space was crowded with construction platforms, defensive satellites, and patrol ships. Finding a clear emergence point that put them close enough to the shipyards, but far enough from the heaviest defenses required precision that left no room for error. Palmer plotted 3 different approach routes and ran simulations on all of them. He chose the one that brought them in from directly above Dakara's North Pole, using the planet's magnetic field to mask their initial emergence signature. The strike force consisted of 30 human warships, everything from heavy cruisers to fast attack corvettes. Hayes divided them into 3 groups with specific targets. Her group would hit the primary construction docks where new capital ships were being assembled. The second group under Captain Marcus Webb would target the supply depots and fuel storage facilities. The third group, led by Captain Christine Long, would engage the defense fleet and keep them occupied while the other 2 groups completed their objectives. They jumped from Earth on a cold morning 3 weeks after the Battle of Jupiter's Gate. The transit to Dakara took only hours thanks to the Shah Fujita drive, a journey that would have required weeks using conventional faster-than-light travel. Hayes stood on the Valiant's bridge as Palmer counted down to emergence. Lieutenant Karen Ross had every weapon armed and ready. Lieutenant Paul Jensen had the engines running at peak efficiency, with emergency power reserves standing by. The strike force emerged from faster-than-light travel precisely where Palmer had calculated, 17,000 miles above Dakara's North Pole. The Vakreen defenders had approximately 90 seconds of confusion. Before their sensors registered the human fleet's impossible position, Hayes used every second of that confusion. She gave the order to fire before the Vakreen could even broadcast an alert. The orbital shipyards were massive structures that had existed for over 2 centuries. They had never been designed to withstand military attack because no one had ever imagined anyone would be crazy enough to assault a fortified military installation in the heart of Council space. Hayes showed them exactly how crazy humanity could be. The Valiant's railguns opened fire at maximum rate, sending tungsten slugs into the shipyard's superstructure at velocities that turned metal into plasma on impact. Captain Webb's group hit the supply depots simultaneously. Nuclear missiles detonated among the fuel storage tanks, creating chain reactions that lit up Dakara's orbital space like a new sun. The explosions destroyed 6 months of accumulated supplies in 6 minutes. Vakreen ships that had been docked for refueling burned with their tanks full of volatile fuel. Captain Long's group engaged the Vakreen defense fleet with brutal efficiency. The defenders had 40 ships on patrol, powerful vessels designed to intimidate and overwhelm primitive species attempting unauthorized system entry. Against human tactics and human weapons, they were outmatched from the first exchange. Long's ships used the Shah Fujita drive to jump in and out of weapons range faster than Vakreen targeting systems could track. They fired from unexpected angles, used the debris from the burning shipyards as cover, and coordinated their attacks with precision that came from weeks of intensive training. The Vakrine commander tried to organize a coherent defense but found himself fighting an enemy that refused to engage in traditional fleet combat. Human ships appeared, fired devastating salvos, and vanished before his vessels could return fire effectively. His tactical officers reported losses mounting faster than they could track. His communications officer could not maintain contact with all defending ships because human electronic warfare systems jammed. Everything on frequencies the Vakrine did not even know could be used for military purposes. Hayes watched her tactical display as the shipyards broke apart under sustained bombardment. Construction platforms collapsed. Assembly frames twisted and melted. Partially completed warships that would have joined the Grand Fleet instead became expensive debris. She felt no satisfaction in the destruction, only grim determination to complete the mission. Every ship destroyed here was one less ship that would attack Earth later. Lieutenant Ross reported ammunition expenditure at 70%. They had been firing continuously for 18 minutes and the shipyards were still not completely neutralized. Hayes made a command decision. She ordered the Valiant to close to point-blank range and use their laser arrays to cut through the shipyard's central power core. Jensen pushed the engines hard, bringing the Valiant through a debris field that would have torn apart a less well-armored ship. Ross fired the lasers in sustained beams that carved through armor and bulkheads until they reached the fusion reactors that powered the entire facility. The reactors went critical and exploded with force that registered on sensors across the entire system. The shipyard ceased to exist as anything except expanding clouds of superheated gas and metal fragments. Hayes ordered immediate withdrawal. 3rd Strike Squadron had accomplished their mission. 40% of the Council's military production capacity no longer existed. The withdrawal was as precise as the attack. Palmer jumped the Valiant out of Dakara's orbital space before the explosion's shockwave could reach them. The rest of 3rd Strike Squadron followed in perfect sequence. Captain Long's group provided rearguard, destroying 3 more Vakrine ships that tried to pursue before jumping away themselves. Total time in hostile space was 26 minutes. Human casualties were light, 3 ships with moderate damage and 47 wounded crew members. No one died. The Vakrine Military Command watched their primary shipyard burn from command centers across their territory. They had considered themselves the Council's premier warriors, the species other races feared and respected. Humanity had just destroyed their most important military installation and killed hundreds of Vakrine defenders without suffering significant losses. The psychological impact was worse than the physical damage. If humans could strike Dakara, they could strike anywhere. Admiral Porter received Hayes' after-action report and immediately dispatched the footage to every corner of Council space. He wanted every species to see what happened when you started wars with humanity. He wanted them to understand that Earth was not defending desperately. They were attacking aggressively. The Council had declared war. Humanity was fighting it their way. Other human strike forces hit targets across Council space in the days and weeks that followed. Captain Webb led raids on communications hubs that coordinated Council fleet movements. Captain Long struck at logistics bases that supplied the assembling Grand Fleet. Newly promoted captains like Stephen Morris and Patricia Gomez hit military academies and training facilities, destroying the infrastructure that created future Council officers. Commander Grant coordinated the entire campaign from her intelligence center on the orbital station. She identified targets based on strategic value and defender weakness. She predicted Council responses and planned countermoves before the Council even reacted. Colonel Ryan Mitchell developed specialized tactics for each target, learning from every engagement and adapting faster than the Council could comprehend. Together they orchestrated a campaign that struck dozens of systems simultaneously, stretching Council defenses beyond breaking point. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session after emergency session, watching their military infrastructure burn while human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Chairman Vexthar demanded explanations from his military commanders. Supreme Marshal Caxthor had none to give. The humans were using technology that should not exist, tactics that violated traditional fleet doctrine, and most frustrating of all, they refused to fight the kind of set-piece battle that Council forces were designed to win. The Grand Fleet finally completed. Assembly at Terminus Gate 8 weeks after the Battle of Jupiter's Gate. 2,000 warships from 12 different species, the largest military force the Council had ever gathered. Supreme Marshal Caxthor took personal command, determined to crush humanity and restore Council prestige. He planned to jump the Grand Fleet directly to Earth and bombard the human homeworld into submission. He expected the primitives would finally understand their place when they watched their cities burn. Commander Grant predicted this move with 98% certainty. She presented her analysis to Admiral Porter with a recommendation that shocked everyone in the room. Humanity should not defend Earth. They should attack Terminus Gate with every ship they could muster. Bring the war to the Council's fortress world and break the Grand Fleet before it could threaten Earth. Porter took exactly 30 seconds to approve the plan. He issued orders to every human ship in space. All forces were to converge on Terminus Gate. They would bring 500 warships, everything humanity had built, captured or retrofitted during 2 months of total war mobilization. The odds would be 4-1 against them. Porter had faced worse odds before. More importantly, he understood what Grant had grasped from the beginning. The Council expected humanity to defend. They expected fear and desperation. They did not expect humans to attack the heart of their power with absolute confidence in victory. Captain Hayes received her new orders aboard the Valiant. 3rd Strike Squadron would lead the assault on Terminus Gate as part of Admiral Porter's main fleet. She gathered her crew and explained the mission. They were going to attack 2,000 Council ships with 500 human vessels. The crew responded with fierce grins and determination. They had burned Dakara. Now they would burn Terminus Gate, then they would burn whatever came after that until the Council understood that humanity did not surrender and did not forgive. The human fleet assembled at a staging point 10 light-years from Terminus Gate. 500 ships formed into battle, groups with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated jump sequences. Admiral Porter broadcast one final message before the attack. He reminded every crew member why they fought. Daniel Crawford had gone to the Council seeking peace and died screaming for it. Now humanity would teach the galaxy the price of murdering human diplomats. The fleet jumped as one, emerging in Terminus Gate's system ready for the battle that would decide the war. The Galactic Council collapsed in the weeks following the Battle of Terminus Gate. 64 species that had existed under Council authority for centuries suddenly faced a reality where the old order no longer held power. Some species called for continued war against humanity, convinced that pride and tradition demanded vengeance regardless of cost. Others, having watched their fleets burn and their shipyards turn to debris, demanded immediate peace before humanity decided to stop showing restraint. The Thesian hegemony was the first to break away. Their military had suffered catastrophic losses at Terminus Gate, and their people had watched Commander Zorath surrender to primitive humans on broadcasts that spread across every populated world. The Thesian premier announced withdrawal from the Council and declared neutrality in what he called an unnecessary war started by Council arrogance. 4 other species followed within days, creating a cascade of defections that threatened to dissolve the Council entirely. Chairman Vexthar found himself under arrest by his own people. The Polarian Union had watched their chairman lead them into a disastrous war, and the Polarian Senate had no patience for leaders who destroyed what took centuries to build. Acting Chairman Larshev took control with a single priority above all others: end the war before humanity decided to visit Polarian worlds with the same fury they had shown at Dakara and Terminus Gate. Supreme Marshal Caxthor of the Vakreen suffered a similar fate. His own military command arrested him after learning he had ordered the execution of Daniel Crawford without proper council vote or legal justification. The Vakreen people, proud warriors who respected strength above all else, had no respect for leaders who started fights they could not finish. Caxthar was stripped of rank and title, then offered to humanity as a prisoner along with Vexthar. Acting Chairman Larshev sent a message to Earth requesting negotiations. President Linda Morgan received the transmission in the Situation Room, surrounded by her cabinet and military leadership. Admiral Jack Porter stood at her right hand while Captain Nicole Hayes attended via video link from the Valiant. Commander Lisa Grant had analyzed every word of the Council's message and found it genuine. They were beaten and they knew it. Morgan's response was carefully crafted. Humanity would accept negotiations, but only on human terms and human territory. The talks would be held on Mars at the New Denver colony, forcing Council representatives to travel to human space and acknowledge Earth's sovereignty. Morgan selected her negotiating team personally. She would lead the talks herself. with Admiral Porter and Captain Hayes providing military perspective and Commander Grant handling intelligence analysis. The Council delegation arrived at Mars 3 weeks after Morgan's message. They came in a single diplomatic vessel escorted by 2 human destroyers, a stark reminder of who held power now. Acting Chairman Larshev led the delegation with representatives from 23 species, all that remained of the once mighty Council. They looked diminished in their formal robes, walking through New Denver's corridors under the gaze of human colonists who remembered watching Daniel Crawford die. The negotiations took place in a conference center that had been built for trade discussions and cultural exchanges. Now it hosted peace talks that would reshape galactic civilization. The Council delegates sat on one side of a long table. President Morgan, Admiral Porter, Captain Hayes, and Commander Grant sat across from them. The atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a knife. Morgan opened the proceedings without diplomatic pleasantries. She placed a datapad on the table and activated a holographic display that showed footage from dozens of battles across Council space. Human ships destroying Council fleets. Dakota burning, Terminus Gate in ruins. The Grand Fleet broken and scattered. Then she showed tactical projections that Commander Grant and Colonel Ryan Mitchell had prepared. If the war continued, humanity could conquer every Council world within 5 years of sustained warfare. The Shah Fujita drive gave Earth strategic mobility the Council could never match. Human weapons technology had proven superior in every engagement. Human tactics were decades ahead of Council doctrine. The Council delegates watched in silence. Some looked angry. Most looked defeated. All of them understood that Morgan was not making threats. She was stating facts backed by evidence they could not dispute. Larshev spoke carefully, choosing his words with the precision of someone walking through a minefield. The Council acknowledged their errors in judgment. They recognized humanity's military superiority. They were prepared to offer reparations and apologies. What terms did Earth require for peace? Morgan laid out humanity's demands without softening or compromise. First, Vexthar and Caxthor would be transported to Earth to face trial under human jurisdiction for the murder of Daniel Crawford. Second, the Galactic Coon. Sil would be dissolved completely and reformed as the Galactic Assembly with equal representation for all species, regardless of age or technology level. Third, all quarantines on developing species would be immediately lifted, and humanity would receive full Assembly membership with a permanent seat on the new Security Council. Fourth, Council member species would provide full access to their scientific and historical databases to Earth. Fifth, reparations would be paid to Daniel Crawford's family and to Earth for war damages. The Council delegates protested immediately. Several called the terms humiliating and excessive. The Vakrine representative, a junior officer who had replaced Caxthor, claimed that such demands violated centuries of established protocol and tradition. The Polarian cultural attaché argued that dissolving the Council would create chaos across known space. Admiral Porter responded with a simple statement that cut through all objections. Humanity did not particularly care about Council traditions or protocols. The Council had burned a human diplomat alive and declared war through that action. Earth had responded with overwhelming force and proven victorious in every major engagement. The terms were not negotiable. Accept them or the war would continue until humanity ran out of Council targets. Captain Hayes added her own perspective. She had been at Jupiter's Gate, at Dakara, and at Terminus Gate. She had watched Council ships burn and Council crews surrender. Earth's military was still mobilized and ready to resume operations within hours. The fleet could jump to any Council world and deliver the same destruction they had shown at Terminus Gate. Was Council pride worth that cost? The negotiations lasted 6 days. The Council delegates tried various approaches to soften the terms or find compromises that preserved some element of their old authority. Morgan rejected every attempt. Earth had won the war decisively. Winners dictated terms. The Council could accept that reality or face extinction. On the 7th day, Acting Chairman Larshev signed the peace agreement on behalf of the 23 remaining Council species. The Galactic Council officially dissolved after 900 years of existence. The Galactic Assembly would form within 6 months, with humanity holding equal status and authority alongside civilizations thousands of years older. Vexthar and Caxthor were transported to Earth in maximum security transport under heavy guard. Their trial was broadcast across every communication channel humanity could reach, ensuring that every species in known space could watch justice being served. The trial lasted 3 weeks and presented overwhelming evidence of their crimes. Both were found guilty of murder, war crimes, and crimes against sentient beings. Both received life sentences in a human maximum security facility in Antarctica, where they would spend the rest of their lives in cells that never saw natural sunlight. The Vakrine government issued a formal apology to humanity and to Daniel Crawford's family. They paid substantial reparations and requested permission to erect a memorial on Vakrine Prime, honoring the human ambassador they had helped murder. Katie Crawford, Daniel's widow, accepted the apology with grace but made clear that forgiveness would take time. Her daughter Emma, now 10 years old, spoke briefly at the memorial dedication via video link. She said her father had wanted peace and cooperation. She hoped the galaxy would finally learn the lesson he died teaching. The Galactic Assembly formed 6 months after the peace agreement, holding its first session on a neutral world, chosen by vote of all participating species. Admiral Nicole Hayes, promoted again for her service during the war, represented humanity on the Assembly Security Council. She sat alongside representatives from species that had once looked down on humanity as primitives. Now they treated her as an equal, because humanity had earned respect the only way the galaxy seemed to understand, through strength. The first act of the assembly was the Crawford Doctrine, named in honor of the man whose death had changed everything. The doctrine established that no species would be punished for technological advancement, that all sapient life deserved dignity and representation, and that the strong had a responsibility to protect rather than dominate the weak. Every member species signed the doctrine into assembly law. Trade routes opened between Earth and dozens of alien worlds. Human technology, particularly the Shafujita drive, became highly sought after. Dr. Helen Carter's team worked with alien scientists to develop commercial versions of the drive that transformed galactic travel and commerce. Earth's economy boomed as human ships carried cargo across space faster and more efficiently than any competitor. Admiral Jack Porter retired from military service 2 years after the war ended. He wrote his memoirs during retirement, documenting how humanity's darkest moment became the catalyst for galactic transformation. His book became required reading at military academies across 50 worlds. Young officers of a dozen species studied human tactics and strategy, learning lessons from a species that had beaten impossible odds through courage and innovation. President Morgan served 2 more terms, overseeing humanity's transformation from an isolated species to one of the Assembly's leading voices. She worked tirelessly to ensure that Earth never forgot the cost of the war, while also building relationships with former enemies. Under her leadership, humanity became known as fierce warriors who preferred peace but would never again tolerate injustice. On Earth, a monument was erected in Geneva at the United Nations Plaza. The statue showed Daniel Crawford with his hand extended in greeting, forever representing humanity's initial hope for peaceful cooperation. His final words were engraved at the base. "We come in friendship, but we will never kneel." Students visited the monument on school trips. Veterans came to pay respects. Alien dignitaries touring Earth always stopped to see it and understand what humanity would sacrifice for dignity. Throughout assembly space, a phrase entered common usage across hundreds of languages. When beings spoke of courage against overwhelming odds, of refusing to accept injustice, of turning tragedy into transformation, they spoke of doing it the human way. It became a compliment and a warning, a recognition that some species could not be broken by force or intimidated by power. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the EDS Daniel Crawford, leading a joint human-alien exploration mission into uncharted space. Her crew included humans alongside Thesians, Polarians, and even a young Vakrine officer who served with distinction. They were mapping new systems and looking for other species who might want to join the assembly. Hayes thought about how far humanity had come in just a few years. From a species watching their diplomat burn to a species that rewrote the rules of galactic civilization. The galaxy had changed forever. The age of council dominance was over. The age of the assembly, built on principles of equality and mutual respect, had begun, and at the heart of it all was humanity, a species that had proven you could start as the underdog and end as the champion if you refused to give up. Daniel Crawford had died seeking peace. His death had brought war, But that war had created something better than what existed before, a galaxy where strength served justice rather than oppression, where young species had voices, where no one would ever again burn alive for daring to seek equality. That was Daniel's real legacy, and humanity would make sure it lasted forever.